Hi neighbor, it's Jim. Thanks for your time. I'm using this YouTube channel to spread my ideas about neighborly politics, about how America bridges the divisions between our states and cultures, and how we can keep those bridges healthy. Picture the following scene. You were on the Titanic. You've evacuated the ship for your safety, and now you're in a lifeboat and see a number of freezing people in the water trying to survive. Some are close, some are far away. There's a little bit of room left in the boat, so you and the others in your lifeboat start talking. How many others can you take into your lifeboat? Some don't want to take any. They warn that if you take too many in, you may swamp the boat, risking everyone's lives. They point out that it would be harder to throw someone out than to not let them in. They point to the people on the boat and say it would be wrong to risk all of their lives on the off chance you could save more. Others call for letting in as many as possible. They correctly point out that every life has dignity and value and ask why the people on the boat get to live when so many others are doomed. Ultimately, you compromise. You decide to let a few more in, a limit that is larger than the first group was set and smaller than the second group would. Though it's approaching the boat's ability, you think this should make sure that the boat won't swamp. Furthermore, you choose who to take in. Some you choose based on their ability to help the group, others you take in for purely humanitarian reasons. In a sense, this scenario is our immigration debate. Some people see the tragedies in the world and correctly point out that all human lives have dignity and value. These lifesavers want to save as many as possible, invite as many people as possible into our neighborhoods. This is a generous and reasonable position, but it isn't the only generous and reasonable position. Others warn that taking too many immigrants into our country will lower our own standard of living and make life more difficult for those already here. These community protectors warn that taking large numbers of immigrants may help criminals or even terrorists enter, or that large numbers of economic migrants may make employment less available for those already here. Of course, there is racism on both sides of the aisle. Some community protectors feel that our country ought to be white. Furthermore, some lifesavers are content to advocate for immigration so long as they can maintain NIMBY communities for themselves and let the immigrants live and work in poor neighborhoods or border states. However, I find that racism isn't necessarily a feature of either position. Though some lifesavers are irresponsible and NIMBYistic, not all of them are. Though some community protectors are inhumane and racist, I find far more people just value our country as it is. These ideological opponents aren't separate political species. Instead, they simply look at the situation differently. In the end, our immigration policy has to be a compromise between these two positions. That's why it has taken so long for immigration reform to come to pass. Though it's worthwhile, compromise is difficult. So what will that compromise look like? Well, first it has to convince the community protectors that we will value our communities and work to keep them safe from the criminals and terrorists who do indeed want to come here to do us harm. We also have to balance the number of economic migrants we accept with our economy's ability to create jobs so that we're not handing jobs to people who haven't contributed to our communities yet. Second, we have to convince the lifesavers that we're doing what we can to fulfill our humanitarian duty and that we will welcome hardworking migrants regardless of their race, religion, language, or other background. Finally, we need to untangle the Gordian knot and undo the bureaucratic hellscape that is the immigration process. In 1910, my great-grandfather Yves lived in a small French town. They experienced some crop difficulties and he decided to emigrate. Rather than head for Argentina, which is what most of the young men in his situation did, he stowed away aboard a ship headed for New York. I can't imagine he had much more than the clothes on his back when he got to Ellis Island, where he was welcomed to America and had the pronunciation of his last name changed. He lived in New York for years, moving to New England and elsewhere and worked as a translator. He worked hard, raised a son, my grandfather, and lived a successful life. Nowadays, however, immigration is entirely different. In 1910, my great-grandfather Yves knew he couldn't expect a handout. The streets of New York could be cruel to someone who couldn't or wouldn't work, but people were still willing to make a try of it, so we were willing to accept them. Nowadays, however, accepting someone into our country is a much bigger investment. The social safety net is larger and more expensive. Public services are more numerous and more expensive. Immigrants are producers, but in the modern world, they're also consumers who need resources, employment, housing, medical care, education, and a host of other things that my great-grandfather never would have expected. This isn't to say that my conservative opinion about the immigration isn't the only reasonable one. I think it's the correct one, but I can easily see how many progressive opinions can be generous and reasonable as well. The trick, then, is that we compromise by simultaneously securing the border and making it easier for our immigrants to come into our communities the right way. That way, when we can truly bless the wretched refuse of the teeming shore and protect our communities at the same time. So here's your assignment. In the comments below, or on your own social media, share the story of a migrant in your life or in your family history, being sure to respect the living people's privacy. Then briefly explain how a reasonable person might be nervous about unregulated migration. Explain what you believe and be kind about the opinions of others. Finally, think about what a successful compromise might look like. Thanks, and God bless.